What is going on, you guys, and welcome to the second major update for the wilds of Gilleigh Loch. So, in the last video, I know that I spent quite a bit of time discussing with you guys the real-life inspirations as well as the personal connections that I had with some of the major characters of that book. This video, however, is going to be all about the upcoming children's book. I'd really like to discuss a plot point or two with you guys, but I guess more importantly, I want to just talk about the overall direction, or what I hope it will be, for the Babbit books as a series moving forward. And I want to start this video off by acknowledging two things. The first of which is that I am acutely aware that with all the different avenues of kids learning and entertainment that there are out there in the world, I am aware that in choosing to write a children's book like I am, I may be doing nothing more than throwing my hat into a ring of an already pretty saturated genre. And because of that, I don't necessarily think, from the outside looking in, when you initially pick up my book and look at it, I don't think you're going to see anything that is awe-inspiring or revolutionary. The anatomical Wind in the Willows-esque art style that I have in mind for this project isn't new. It's been done before, countless times. The concept of using cute talking animals to teach your children and resonate with them has been done to death. So yeah, I don't think when it comes to looking at the building blocks of this book or books, you're gonna see anything that you haven't seen before. I don't think there's gonna be anything that's gonna initially take your breath away. And I can admit that, there is a lot of things out there. There's a lot of competition when it comes to doing things for kids. And it is very, very difficult to come up with a concept that an audience hasn't seen before. It's very difficult to be the first one of its kind when it comes to anything to do with kids. With that being said, however, I do wholeheartedly believe that the area with which we can be unique and we can stand apart and above all those other things is in the lessons and the morals of the stories themselves. Now, I'm not talking about your traditional, this is how we make friends, this is how we share our stuff, this is how we ask for forgiveness when we hurt each other's feelings. I'm not talking about any of that. That's not to say that that kind of stuff won't be in my books. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee that they will be in the grander scope of storytelling. But I really want the core of these books, the heartbeat of these books, to be something unique, to be something deeper and complex and ultimately special. I see this as my opportunity to teach kids about things like physical disabilities, mental disorders and anxieties, situations that very much do exist in this world of ours, but they don't necessarily get talked about as much as they should, especially to younger children. Now, I know that in saying that, there's probably going to be some parents that say, well, I'm not sure if this is such a good idea because it might be too deep and complex for my children or child to comprehend. It might go over their heads, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we'll discuss it. Maybe it's something better to talk about when they're a little bit older and they can kind of process everything. And my argument is pretty much that I'm not afraid to push this envelope. I'm not afraid to push your child's understanding. And the reason I'm not is because I have a pretty strong belief that kids are way smarter than we ever give them credit for. And they understand way more than we ever give them credit for. Now, they might not always have the most fundamental way to get from A to B. They're still children. They still have pretty interesting ways to solve logical problems or to think about things logically. But at the end of the day, if you really pay attention, you'll be surprised at just how much they can wrap their little brains around. And something somebody said at a recent social gathering that I was at really stuck with me and really kind of reinforced this belief. He said that kids, without really giving it a second thought, without really worrying about the consequences or censoring themselves or anything like that, they will ask the questions that we as adults are afraid to answer. Meaning that when we're kids, we don't think about anything rather than getting the answers to the questions that pop into our heads. Meaning that, little kids can go up to people like me in Walmart and say, what's wrong with your legs? Or if somebody that has to wear a helmet in public, comes in contact with them, they say, hey, why are you wearing a helmet? What makes you different? Why is this happening? And as adults, we feel like that's a bit of a risk. Maybe it's taboo, maybe it's embarrassing, maybe, whatever. And I think that's a problem, right? I couldn't agree more with that statement, and it couldn't kind of fuel my belief more, because I take my disability, for example. I have had full-grown adults come up to me and ask questions about my disability. I have had adults not have any idea what my disability actually was when I told them, like, I have CP, and they're like, what is that? And it's like, keep in mind, these are full-grown adults that don't know that it's okay to ask questions, that don't know that it's okay to pitch in and help me, or stand back and watch me struggle my way through something if I prefer. But there's so many questions that people have that don't get answers because we're afraid. We don't know what's offensive or what's not. We don't know what's okay, what's not. We don't know how to treat people that are different because we don't learn, because we don't get the answers to the questions that we have. And that is a problem. And I think it's important to teach kids because the reality is, and it might be a little bit different depending on where you live, people like me might not, they might be few and far between. But at the end of the day, it's a big world out there, and there are a lot of us. And it's a lot better when kids are educated and they can look at somebody like me and they understand because it's not foreign to them, because they've had this conversation, because they've learned these things. They've learned how to treat people. And there's just so much that can be taught and learned from these subjects that we all avoid. And I guess in terms of it being too complex, it really isn't. The challenge is just that, you can introduce these tough, complex subjects, and all you really have to do is approach it and present it in a way that children understand and comprehend. Do it in a way that takes it down to their level so that they can wrap their heads around it and get from point A to point B the way that their little minds work. It is a challenge, yes. But if somebody cares enough to take the time to really think things out, get into the mind of a child, and know exactly how to bring it down to their level, they'll figure it out. It's not impossible. Which brings me to the target subject for the first Babbit book. This book, which is social anxiety. Now, social anxiety is something that has plagued me for my entire life. Certainly my entire childhood. And I'm coming up very shortly here on 26 years old, and I still suffer from it. To somebody that doesn't suffer from social anxiety or really know what it is, if I was to ask you, what is social anxiety? What does it mean to you? You would probably tell me it means that I'm shy, quiet, I have issues making friends, I don't like to do new things that are outside of my comfort zone. All of which would be correct, yes. But the thing is, with social anxiety and any other mental disorder or disability, there are so many other elements to it. It's more than just those things. It's also not liking big crowds, not liking loud noises or sustained loud noise that you would get from crowds. It's trouble making eye contact or not liking eye contact. It's difficulty talking on the phone. And so many other things that maybe I haven't even experienced. Maybe I don't know that's part of it. But I think that's an important thing to share with kids. And I think that is a pretty good way to introduce Babbit and the world he lives in, and kind of all the other characters that will become reoccurring characters as the series goes on. My plan is to give Babbit some elements of social anxiety from my experience, have him, meet these characters, which he will of course struggle with. Then they will kind of suggest that he do something outside of his comfort zone, each and every one he comes to. Which of course, again, he will struggle with. But by the end of the book, he has a lot of new friends. He has had a day filled with new things, and he's come out of his shell and become the character that I think he needs to be for kids going forward, which isn't too much unlike me. I start out really quiet and really shy and reserved, and the more I get to know you, the more I come out of my shell, the more I come alive and really become the person that everybody knows me as. But it never starts out like that. So I think mimicking my own reality with it, with Babbit, within the story, I think is really, really good. It's good for me, and hopefully it'll be good for kids. Excuse me. And hopefully kids will be able to recognize kind of what social anxiety is. And before you freak out, my goal with this is really not to, I don't want to label your kids and say, I don't want to label them as having social anxiety. I don't want to say, within the book, I don't want it to be like, oh, if you feel like this, or if you've ever thought this, or blah, 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 guess what? You have social anxiety. That's not what I'm trying to do. Right? I just want, on one hand, I want kids to be able to build a bond with Babbit. And kind of in the sense of like, think of like a little girl in a wheelchair, right? She comes across a character in a book that's also in a wheelchair. She says, oh, look, Mom and Dad, that little animal is in a wheelchair just like me. And then she feels comfortable with that character. She relates to that character because that character is in a wheelchair just like her. That's exactly what I'm hoping happens, is kids build a bond with Babbit, who has social anxiety, so that they can say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, this little bunny is quiet and shy and doesn't like to do new things like me. And they can build that bond and kind of, like that. So it's not about labeling. It's not about forcing the idea of social anxiety down anybody's throat. It's just about making those real life connections, and realizing that a book character might just be like you. You're not the only one, stuff like that. But more importantly is the other side of the coin, where it's just like, I'm hoping that through Babbit and through these stories, you can, you as in kids, can recognize what social anxiety is. So if they were to go to school or see somebody in the neighborhood maybe who, has difficulties like that, if they're quiet and they're shy or they don't like making eye contact or whatever, I don't want kids to be like, oh, they're a freak, they're a loser, they're weird. I'm hoping that from learning what they can through these Babbit books, you can be like, okay, this kid's not a freak. This kid's not a loser. This kid's not weird. He's not, he's not the neighborhood freakazoid monster kid. And this is what I can do to help him feel more comfortable and help them feel better. And maybe go on to build some pretty solid friendships. It's all about, number one, acknowledging that if your child or a child feels like this, they're not the only one, because a little bunny has social anxiety too, or characters throughout the series have these issues too. So your kids aren't the only one, and I want them to know that, and I want them to feel special and feel comfortable, and I want them to build bonds with those characters, because I know when I was, a kid and I would come across a character with CP or any other type of disability, that was a really special moment for me, and I really want to recreate that with Babbit. But more importantly, like I said, I want them to walk away having learned something, so that they can apply it to the real world, and they can say, okay, obviously this kid's quiet, he's shy, he doesn't like making eye contact, whatever it is. And instead of calling them, a freak or a weird, they can say, this is what I can do to make them feel better and, become their friend. So I guess in closing, my mission statement with the Babbit books is to introduce these concepts, teach them about these concepts, and then apply it. It's to acknowledge these things, it's to expose them to these things, and then show them what to do. It's all about broadening their horizons, opening their eyes to what the real world is like. And the real world is crawling with a bunch of interesting people with physical ailments, with mental ones, with all kinds of different things. That really aren't all that weird. And regardless of what they are, they're no different than you and me. And I think it's really important to teach kids that. So that is my goal. That is my mission statement with the Babbit books, is just to acknowledge these things, to introduce these things, teach them about these things, and then hopefully they have something at the end of the day that they can apply to real life scenarios and situations. Unfortunately, I don't have a title for this book currently. but I'm hoping by the time that I actually start writing this thing, I'll have a permanent title that I can announce. So just keep an eye out for that if you're interested. And yeah, if you have any questions or comments or anything, please feel free to get a hold of me. If you know somebody with a particular disability, if you got a kid that's diabetic and you want, I'm very, very open to the idea of learning and dealing with things that don't personally affect me, because I know in a lot of ways that I'm fortunate, and there's so many more issues out there that kids need to know about. So if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, please don't hesitate to message me or get a hold of me in some way. I'd be more than happy to talk to you, to learn from you, whatever. So yeah, keep an eye out for when I actually start the project to get the official title. And until next time, guys, we'll see you later.